The United Airlines flight from Washington, D.C. to New York began like any other, but who could have guessed that a political crisis was about to erupt in that passenger cabin? Karoline Leavitt, a confident and decisive woman, stepped onto the plane with the demeanor of someone always in control. Dressed in a black blazer paired elegantly with a professional skirt, and with softly curled hair, she created an image both powerful and graceful. Carrying a leather handbag, Karoline headed straight into first class, where she had reserved her seat weeks ago. She paid no attention to the curious glances of other passengers, focusing solely on her next objective. Though Karoline was widely recognized as a conservative political spokesperson, at this moment she was merely another passenger, calmly and quietly boarding the plane as if nothing could disrupt her composure. For Karoline, this flight wasn't just a simple journey. It was also a quiet space where she could both work and enjoy moments of tranquility. She reached for her laptop from her bag, opened it, and began jotting down notes, rearranging ideas for her upcoming meeting. Karoline was a woman of action, and given what she'd achieved in her career, she had no reason to worry about anyone's attention. Even seated in the first-class cabin of a commercial flight, she maintained the demeanor of a leader, an influential individual. But on this flight, someone else didn't regard her as an ordinary passenger. Jessica Reed, a young flight attendant, immediately recognized Karoline as she entered first class. Jessica held strong political views, and she couldn't suppress her tension upon seeing Karoline, the conservative spokesperson, sitting in first class. Jessica couldn't deny that Karoline embodied qualities she disliked: confidence, decisiveness, and representation of values Jessica considered reactionary. She knew Karoline openly supported the previous administration and policies Jessica vehemently opposed. Despite this, Jessica tried to maintain a professional attitude, though deep down she felt increasing discomfort. As Karoline took her seat, Jessica couldn't take her eyes off her, not due to attraction or her appearance, but because Karoline's presence evoked a profound sense of ideological opposition. Jessica, a young woman of the new generation, believed passionately in protecting minority rights, promoting equality, and opposing discrimination. Meanwhile, Karoline represented everything Jessica saw as wrong and outdated in society. The political divide between the two was so clear that even in the confined space of the airplane cabin, the tension steadily rose. When Jessica approached Karoline to check her ticket, suspicion stirred within her. "Excuse me, may I see your ticket?" Jessica asked, her voice gentle yet subtly investigative. Karoline raised her head, looking straight at Jessica with eyes radiating confidence and determination. Without hesitation, Karoline offered a slight smile and handed over her ticket for Jessica to check. "Of course," she replied calmly, as if there was nothing remarkable about it. Although a small act, in Jessica's eyes this clearly signaled that Karoline wasn't just another passenger not due to her first-class ticket, but because of what she represented, the political values Jessica couldn't accept. As Jessica quietly returned to her duties, a feeling of discomfort spread throughout her mind. She couldn't explain why she felt this way, but the feeling was unmistakably real. She suddenly wondered whether Karoline truly deserved her first-class seat. Did someone with conservative views and a valid ticket truly deserve respect? This question haunted Jessica, preventing her from mastering her emotions. Meanwhile, Karoline maintained remarkable calmness. Even under scrutiny and through the lens of opposing political views, she continued her work as though completely unaffected. She calmly wrote in her notebook, each word quietly outlining a path forward for her upcoming decisions. Everything around her, the curious glances and unspoken words, seemed incapable of disturbing her concentration. Gradually, Karoline started sensing the growing tension in the air, the glances from other passengers, the whispered conversations behind her, all reflecting back on her. Yet, instead of reacting, she became even more serene. Karoline knew this was precisely the moment she needed to remain calm and prevent external factors from influencing her. She was not someone easily swayed. From this moment onward, Karoline recognized that this flight wasn't merely a journey, it was an opportunity to continue her mission, not only confronting personal challenges but also creating a greater social impact. On the other side, Jessica couldn't stop thinking about Karoline. The tension between them steadily intensified. Jessica felt she couldn't let the situation pass unnoticed. She couldn't tolerate Karoline casually sitting in first class, a space Jessica believed was reserved exclusively for those with correct values. In Jessica's mind, a confrontation had already begun forming. Sooner or later, she knew she'd have to face the consequences of her decision. When Karoline Leavitt entered the first-class cabin of the flight, no one could have predicted that this would turn into a prolonged and complex psychological battle between her and a young flight attendant, Jessica Reed. Everything started simply and normally, but within minutes, the atmosphere on the flight grew heavy and tense. The situation was not a major incident, but it was a social and political shock, something Jessica could not overlook. Karoline, a strong and confident woman, didn't notice the growing discomfort within Jessica. She simply focused on her laptop, beginning to jot down important notes for her upcoming meeting. While Karoline calmly continued her work, Jessica stood quietly, wondering why she felt so uneasy and disturbed. This wasn't the first time Jessica had encountered people with differing political views, but Karoline's presence, as an openly conservative woman, made her feel like everything around her was collapsing. This was no longer just a regular flight for Jessica. In her mind, it had become a small yet significant battle. Jessica had witnessed discrimination and prejudice in society before, but this time, the discrimination came from someone with societal power, someone who could easily influence others with her conservative views. Jessica felt offended, not because of who Karoline was, but because of the values Karoline represented. This was why Jessica couldn't ignore her, couldn't tolerate Karoline's presence in first class. Karoline's political views seemed like a mockery of everything Jessica was fighting for. Unable to sit still, Jessica decided to approach Karoline. Even though Karoline didn't make any aggressive moves, Jessica felt that it had gone too far. She knew a decision had to be made right then and there. "Excuse me, may I see your ticket?" Jessica asked, her voice gentle but with a clear scrutinizing tone. The question wasn't just about checking the ticket, it was an assertion of her authority in this situation. Karoline looked up, neither surprised nor angry, and simply smiled. "Of course," she replied, calmly handing over her ticket. However, to Jessica, that calmness felt like a provocation. She knew Karoline was not just any passenger, and perhaps she was deliberately ignoring the political issues that Jessica felt were so important. Jessica checked the ticket and couldn't deny that Karoline had a valid first-class ticket. But this didn't ease the discomfort she felt. Her logic told her everything was in order, but her heart could not tolerate the fact that Karoline was sitting there in first class, a space where Jessica believed only people who shared her values should be. The political divide in Jessica made her feelings uncontrollable. Karoline noticed the tension in Jessica's demeanor but didn't let it affect her. "Thank you for checking my ticket," Karoline said gently, not rushing to show discomfort. Yet, her calmness only made Jessica more irritated. No one in the first-class cabin knew that between the two of them, a silent battle had already begun. Jessica returned to her seat, but the anger inside her seemed to grow. Soon after, as the flight stabilized, Jessica approached Karoline once more. "I need you to move to another seat," Jessica said, her tone now colder and more determined. There might have been an error in the system. Karoline did not rush to react. She simply looked at Jessica, then gently replied, "I booked my first-class seat in advance, and it has been confirmed. I don't think there's any mistake." Jessica could not accept this answer. "But I don't think you deserve to sit here," Jessica cut in, her voice suddenly sharp. "First class is for people who share our values." The words were not only about the seat on the plane but were a message about the political discrimination Jessica felt. In her eyes, Karoline didn't belong here, she didn't deserve what she had. Jessica felt as if Karoline embodied everything she opposed in society, and now, she couldn't take it anymore. Karoline wasn't angry, but in her eyes, a sense of understanding began to surface. She knew this confrontation wasn't just a personal disagreement. It was a battle of two conflicting worldviews, and she understood that sometimes, such conflict was inevitable. "If you think that way, I'm sorry," Karoline said, her tone unchanged. "But I have a valid ticket, and I have the right to sit here." Jessica walked away, frustrated, feeling hurt and uneasy. She didn't know what to do next, but the political divide and the sense of offense weren't easy to shake off. She couldn't stop thinking about what Karoline represented and what she was fighting against. Jessica could look at Karoline and see the confidence of someone used to power and influence. She also realized she couldn't simply move past the feeling of being trampled on. She began to wonder if she had been too hasty in her actions. The tension between the two women became irreparable. One maintained calm, while the other wallowed in anger and a sense of being wronged. This wasn't just a personal conflict, it reflected a society growing increasingly divided by differing political views. This story didn't end with just a confrontation between two women, but as a lesson about what happens when personal and societal values clash, when discrimination and political beliefs cannot be reconciled. Karoline, though uncertain about what Jessica would do next, knew her actions would have an impact. Her calmness was her strategy. She didn't react strongly, didn't get pulled into Jessica's battle. Instead, she continued with her work, knowing that in a short while, her actions would show that no one could control her just because of political differences. After the first confrontation, the tension between Karoline Leavitt and Jessica Reed did not diminish. While Jessica felt as though she was gradually gaining the upper hand in this situation, Karoline continued to maintain an unpredictable calm demeanor. For Jessica, the feeling of helplessness and discontent kept rising. She couldn't understand how Karoline could sit there, calmly working as if nothing was happening, while Jessica felt she was fighting to defend the values she had always believed in. Gradually, this confrontation became not only a personal challenge but also a battle between two opposing political ideologies. Karoline Leavitt is a strong and decisive woman. She is not easily swayed by emotions, and she understands that in a conflict like this, her actions will have far-reaching consequences. Although Jessica tried to provoke her, Karoline did not allow the words or disrespect from a stranger to affect her decisions. Instead of confronting Jessica directly, she maintained her composure and continued doing what she needed to do, as if nothing was more important than maintaining control in every situation. Karoline knew that in the modern world, where every action can be judged by society and the media, staying calm and in control of the situation was the most important thing. She could not let Jessica's personal emotions, or anyone else's, change her approach. Karoline's actions were not a spontaneous reaction, but a deliberate choice not to fall into the trap of unnecessary arguments. This was a battle she didn't need to win by showing strength or exerting pressure. Karoline had learned that calmness and reason would lead her to ultimate victory, without the need for challenge or dispute. What mattered most to Karoline was never losing control. For Jessica, the encounter with Karoline was not just a simple communications situation. It was a test of her beliefs, of the values she had always fought to protect. Jessica could not bear the presence of Karoline, a spokesperson for the conservatives, in first class. In Jessica's eyes, people with views like Karoline's did not deserve this privilege, as they represented values that Jessica considered outdated and reactionary. Although Karoline did not respond to Jessica's provocation, each time she continued working with such calm, Jessica felt rejected. This feeling wasn't just about personal conflict, it reflected the polarization in society, where political values not only exist in formal debates but also directly affect everyday situations. Every time Jessica saw Karoline, she didn't just see an ordinary passenger, she saw a confrontation with everything she couldn't accept in society. That's why this confrontation could not end. Jessica began to feel she had to do something to show she could not overlook this injustice. She wanted to see Karoline react, to make her endure the same dissatisfaction that Jessica felt. However, nothing could make Karoline change. She continued with her work, maintaining her resolve, not responding to Jessica's provocations. In Karoline's eyes, all this tension was just a test she had to overcome. Each time Jessica approached, Karoline simply smiled lightly and continued her work, as if nothing was more important than maintaining her composure. Karoline knew this wouldn't last forever, but she also understood that she could not respond to Jessica's provocation by showing emotion. Each move she made would have twice the power if she could maintain her calm while Jessica was swept away by her own emotional waves. Karoline didn't need to create conflict. Her silence was the strongest response. Jessica realized that Karoline's silence was not a sign of defeat. It was a display of mental strength that Jessica couldn't possess. Every time Karoline worked, looking at her notes, Jessica felt her own failure becoming clearer. She couldn't understand why she let her emotions control every action. The anger inside her grew, but when facing Karoline, she only saw determination and composure. Jessica began to sense her own frustration, realizing that impulsive actions couldn't solve the problem. Karoline had won, not through a public battle or a loud response. She won by not allowing anything to disrupt her calm. Karoline continued working, continuing to do what she knew was right, and that was the true victory. Jessica felt defeated. She couldn't do anything to change the situation, because every time she tried to apply pressure, Karoline just stayed silent, making Jessica feel deeper frustration and exhaustion. The difference between them was not only political discrimination but also their differing perspectives on the issue. Karoline understood that in today's world, calmness and self-control are what help one to win. Meanwhile, Jessica, although not lacking in determination, was unable to achieve what she wanted because of her emotions and lack of self-control. The conflict was no longer about political ideas, it had become a lesson on how each person handles tense situations in life. In the end, as the flight neared its conclusion, Karoline proved that strength does not always come from grand actions, but sometimes from emotional control and perseverance. Jessica, though feeling defeated, also realized one thing: sometimes, emotional outbursts are not the way to resolve everything. While Karoline maintained her composure, Jessica had to face the fact that her emotions had led to failure. As the plane landed and passengers began preparing to disembark, Jessica stood in a corner, filled with internal conflict. Meanwhile, Karoline had packed up her belongings, ready to leave with calmness unshaken. She smiled lightly when receiving appreciative looks from a few passengers, but still didn't let these events affect her mindset. The story ended not with a victorious battle, but with a lesson in perseverance and emotional control in life. Right after the flight ended and all the passengers disembarked, none of them could have imagined that what seemed like a simple incident would become a political storm, having a far-reaching impact on everyone involved. Karoline Leavitt and Jessica Reed were no longer just two individuals, they had become symbols of a confrontation between two completely different worldviews. While Karoline remained silent and composed, Jessica could not bear the injustice she felt and decided that she would not let it go. After returning home, Jessica couldn't shake the thoughts about the flight. The anger remained deep inside her, like a flame that couldn't be extinguished. She decided that she wouldn't allow Karoline, or anyone representing opposing values, to remain comfortable and silent. She opened her phone and posted a lengthy tweet recounting the encounter between herself and Karoline on the flight. She detailed the treatment she considered discriminatory, criticized Karoline's arrogance, and how she exploited her first-class privilege just because she was conservative. "Today, I witnessed blatant discrimination in society," Jessica wrote. "A passenger with a first-class ticket, representing conservative views, is favored and treated specially. I cannot accept this, and I will not stay silent." Jessica's post quickly received thousands of shares. The online community, especially those with similar views to hers, began attacking Karoline, creating a boycott wave not just against her but also United Airlines. The comments were filled with strong criticism: "This is discrimination, Karoline Leavitt doesn't deserve these privileges." Outrage poured out from every corner of social media. When Karoline received the first notifications from social media, she was stunned. She opened her phone and saw thousands of critical comments, accusations from strangers. She wasn't new to facing criticism, but this time the reaction was so intense it couldn't be ignored. Media outlets began reporting on the situation, and the wave of backlash against her spread further. Karoline realized that this was no longer just a personal attack. It was a political battle, one she couldn't easily ignore. She couldn't let the criticism shake her confidence. Instead, Karoline decided to stand firm and respond with calm, not allowing anger or emotions to dictate her actions. She participated in an online interview with a major news outlet, where she clearly explained that everything had been blown out of proportion. Karoline stated that she had no intention of discriminating or creating division, but was simply exercising her rights as a passenger. "Politics shouldn't be brought into every space, and my actions were not provocations. This is just me exercising my rights," Karoline calmly explained. "What I'm doing is using my rights, just like any other passenger. I see no reason to feel guilty for a personal decision. We must learn to respect differences and live in harmony, not attack others just because they have different views." As soon as the interview ended, Karoline knew these reactions were no longer just personal criticism. They had become a major crisis for United Airlines. The company faced widespread boycotts from the online community, and its stock began to plummet. Media outlets were covering the incident, making United Airlines the focal point of the backlash. All eyes were on the major airline, and they knew they had to act immediately to mitigate the damage. A crisis meeting was held at United Airlines. Executives and media experts discussed how to handle the situation. They all realized that they couldn't ignore the reactions from the online community and their partners. If they didn't act quickly, the United brand could be severely impacted. A decision was made: the company would issue a public apology and ask Jessica Reed to clarify her post. They hoped this would ease the growing discontent. However, Karoline felt that an apology wouldn't be enough. She couldn't let herself be drawn into an unfair political game. She decided to speak up more forcefully, calling for a public dialogue about the political discrimination she was facing. This was no longer a personal battle, but a larger societal issue where political divides had started to affect everyone's lives. Although the online criticism made Jessica feel that she had won a political battle, deep down, that victory brought an overwhelming sense of emptiness. She couldn't stop thinking about the consequences of her actions. Gradually, she realized that even though she had sparked a strong boycott wave, it hadn't truly made her feel at ease. She felt that she had gone too far, and now she had to face the unforeseen repercussions. The anger she had expressed on social media had caused harm not only to Karoline but also to herself. She began to realize that impulsive actions didn't always yield good results. Social media and emotional outbursts could create temporary victories, but they could also deeply harm one's self-esteem and trust. Jessica gradually realized that she needed to change the way she viewed everything. She could no longer live in hostility and resentment. She decided to delete her post on social media, apologize to Karoline, and to those who had been hurt by her words. Feelings of regret began to creep into her mind, and she realized that sometimes, strength doesn't come from attacking others, but from acknowledging mistakes and starting over. In the end, Karoline and Jessica were not just facing each other over a small issue but had entered into a larger dialogue about rights, discrimination, and justice in modern society. Both had learned valuable lessons from this confrontation. Karoline realized that sometimes respect doesn't just come from what we say but from how we act in difficult situations. Jessica, though not fully agreeing with all of Karoline's decisions, understood that anger doesn't always bring about positive change. This incident didn't end here. It opened up a broader discussion about how we deal with differences in society and how we respect individual rights without causing harm to each other. Both Karoline and Jessica would have to face the long-term consequences of their actions, but they would also learn from their mistakes in order to build a fairer world, where differences are not a reason to divide but an essential part of diversity and harmony in society. After the confrontation between Karoline Leavitt and Jessica Reed reached its peak and became a storm on social media, both found themselves caught up in unforeseen consequences. The division was no longer just about politics, it had become a matter of ego, deep misunderstandings, and unresolved emotions. Both Karoline and Jessica, despite being on opposite sides, had to face larger questions about themselves, their beliefs, and how they viewed the world around them. Immediately after Jessica's post went viral on social media, her life changed completely. She not only received support from those who shared her views but also faced harsh criticism from others. The boycotts and judgments seemed to echo endlessly from all corners of the internet. For Jessica, initially, this attention brought a sense of victory. But as things escalated, she realized that this victory came at too high a cost. The feeling of victory from social media quickly turned into emptiness. Jessica realized that she was no longer simply someone standing up for justice. She felt as though she had become a part of a never-ending political battle, where people like her were just pawns in an eternal game. She began to feel a fatigue in her soul, loneliness, and a sense of aimlessness in a struggle that seemed to bring no change. Every day, when looking in the mirror, Jessica no longer saw herself as a winner. She saw a woman divided, someone lost in the very ideals she thought she was protecting. She began to question whether she was doing the right thing, whether she had gone too far and couldn't turn back. The feeling of guilt kept creeping into her mind, and she realized that being prominent on social media couldn't fill the void in her heart. Meanwhile, Karoline, who had initially maintained her stance and remained silent in the face of attack, began to realize the gravity of the situation. She was not someone who sought attention, but when her name was mentioned everywhere, she began to feel a strange loneliness. Contrary to her calm demeanor on the flight, she was now facing relentless criticism from all sides. She had become a target not only for Jessica's supporters but also for groups with opposing political views. Karoline couldn't understand how a small incident could provoke such a massive reaction. She began to reflect on her decision to remain silent. Was she right to not respond to Jessica's provocation? Had her silence escalated the tension and failed to resolve the issue? She didn't regret what she had done, but she began to realize that sometimes silence could lead to misunderstandings. Karoline decided that now she needed to do something to explain her perspective to others, rather than just silently accept everything. But not all silence is the enemy. Karoline did something few could do. She re-examined the confrontation and decided that only dialogue could resolve the deep misunderstandings. She decided to call Jessica. It was a difficult decision, as they had drifted too far apart and had nothing left to say but their conflicts. But Karoline knew that if she continued to let things slide without trying to resolve them, she would never find peace. When Jessica received the call from Karoline, she felt a strange confusion. She should have felt triumphant about her victory, but instead, she felt anxiety and regret. After listening to Karoline's gentle words, Jessica felt a profound change within her. She no longer saw herself as the victor. Things had gone too far, and now, she just wanted to find the peace and harmony she once thought impossible with someone who held opposing views. Karoline and Jessica finally met, not to continue debating, but to understand each other's true thoughts. In their conversation, there was no hostility or criticism. Both were open and honest, sharing long-held worries and emotions. Karoline spoke of the loneliness she had endured, of facing constant opposition from society, and how she learned that not every decision leads to victory. Jessica shared her emotional failure, about things she hadn't seen while standing in the political and social media battle. This meeting was not just an exchange between two people but a journey to find harmony in what seemed like irreconcilable differences. Despite their significant differences in views, Karoline and Jessica ultimately realized that understanding and compassion could transcend the barriers created by politics and society. In this meeting, neither tried to convince the other to change. They simply listened and respected what the other was going through. Jessica realized she no longer had to fight alone. She didn't need to oppose Karoline, nor did she need to defeat her. Instead, she realized that understanding and accepting differences was the greatest victory they could both achieve. Karoline also felt a sense of relief as she no longer faced constant criticism. She no longer felt isolated, and Jessica's understanding helped her see that sometimes listening and understanding are more important than any ideal. After this meeting, both Karoline and Jessica understood that maturity comes from confronting one's own mistakes and learning to accept differences. They not only understood each other better but also learned a great lesson about not judging others based on a single encounter or simple political views. This meeting not only changed the way they saw themselves but also changed the way they viewed society. Karoline no longer felt pressured to always stand firm in her views. She understood that maturity comes from knowing when to fight and when to let go. She also understood that not everyone would agree with her, and that didn't mean they were wrong. Jessica, on the other hand, no longer saw herself as the winner in this battle, but as someone learning from her own mistakes. She understood that the battle wasn't about winning or losing, but a journey to understand and accept each other. As the storm after the final flight calmed down, both Karoline Leavitt and Jessica Reed realized that their confrontation was not just about politics, but a journey to find peace within themselves. After all the criticism, public posts, and the polarization they had endured, they began to understand that true change doesn't come from a fight for victory, but from facing oneself and finding harmony in differences. Jessica had gone through a turbulent wave from social media. At first, the feeling of victory as her posts spread across social platforms made her feel like a hero. But as the attention turned into relentless criticism and attacks, Jessica began to feel a growing exhaustion within her. She could not deny that social media fame, although it allowed her to influence, did not bring lasting satisfaction. She began to feel empty, as if all the reactions from the online community could not replace the inner peace she longed for. Each morning, Jessica felt trapped in a battle with no end in sight. The constant criticism and boycotts pushed her into a corner, where she started to doubt herself. She wondered, have I gone too far? Am I truly doing the right thing? These questions had no immediate answers. The feeling of disappointment and the exhaustion from a battle that seemed to be leading to victory now turned into deep regret. When she looked in the mirror, Jessica no longer saw the image of a resilient warrior. She felt like a failure, someone who had lost herself in a struggle she once believed was right. In the end, Jessica decided to step away from the virtual space of social media, not out of fear, but because she realized that to truly change, she needed to face herself, to stop and reflect on her mistakes, and understand that life is not always about winning, but about internal change. While Jessica faced conflicting emotions, Karoline, despite maintaining her silence throughout, felt a heaviness in her soul. She realized that although she had chosen to stand firm and not engage in the argument, the price of silence was loneliness. The criticism from all sides, the unending judgments made her feel increasingly isolated from society. She sensed that this silence, which had initially seemed like calmness and determination, had now become a burden. Karoline began to wonder if her silence had been a mistake. Should she have spoken out to defend herself and the values she had always pursued? Or was silence, avoiding all conflict, just a way for her to avoid facing her true feelings? She could not continue living in a world where she only defended her views without ever opening herself to embracing differences. Each passing day, Karoline felt herself drifting further from those around her, and this made her feel tired and trapped. But then, in those lonely moments, Karoline realized something important. She could not change society, but she could change how she responded to it. She began to open up, not just to those around her, but also to herself. Karoline understood that, whether society changed or not, what mattered was that she could face herself without regret. She needed to learn to love and forgive herself. When Karoline realized the loneliness and the mounting tension in her heart, she decided to do something she never thought she would do: call Jessica. She didn't call to continue the argument or to rebut Jessica's criticisms, but simply to talk, to understand that the two of them could find harmony, even if they did not agree on everything. When Jessica received the call, she felt a great sense of confusion. She never thought she would hear Karoline's voice again. But after all she had been through and after feeling the change within herself, she realized that this confrontation had gone too far. She had not properly understood what had happened, and now, she needed to face Karoline to find peace in her heart. When she heard Karoline's sincere words, Jessica felt a burden lifted. She realized that, despite their differences, understanding and respect for each other were the most important things in life. Their meeting was no longer a confrontation. Karoline and Jessica no longer saw each other as enemies, but as friends, people who had once struggled together but now found harmony in their differences. They shared their feelings and the internal conflicts they had faced and realized that no one is perfect, but we all can learn from our mistakes. Karoline no longer felt isolated, and Jessica no longer felt the need to fight to defend a misguided ideal. After their meeting, Karoline and Jessica no longer viewed life through the lens of division and opposition. Their story was no longer a political battle but a journey toward finding harmony in differences. They both realized that the world is not a simple place to live in, but understanding and listening are the keys to overcoming barriers. Karoline learned that even though she could hold firm to her personal views, she could not live in a world of only division. She began to open up more, accept the differences of others, and no longer felt the separation she once did. Each time she faced a difficult situation, she not only defended herself but also sought to connect and build understanding with those who had different views. Meanwhile, Jessica learned that life is not always a win-lose battle, but a process of change and growth. She no longer felt the need to defend her ego at all costs. She began to find value in listening and understanding others, rather than just seeking victory. A sense of peace began to settle in her heart as she understood that the greatest change comes from humility and the willingness to learn from one's mistakes. In the end, Karoline and Jessica found a way to reconcile in a world filled with division. They were no longer the ones trying to change each other's political views, but they had learned how to respect and listen to differences. Their story is proof that not all confrontations need to end in victory or defeat. Sometimes, what's important is realizing that harmony can be achieved when we are willing to face ourselves, our mistakes, and the lessons we've learned. Karoline and Jessica were no longer the winners of this political battle, but people who had grown through their own mistakes and the inner struggles they had overcome. Both understood that in life, no one is perfect, and we cannot change others, but we can change how we face them. That was the greatest lesson they had learned on this journey.